Have you ever walked away from a conversation and thought, why did I say that? Not because you lied or meant harm, but because the words felt hollow or rushed or just not you. It's strange how a few careless sentences can echo louder than hours of quiet effort. And sometimes the damage isn't in what we meant, it's in what we didn't pause to consider. The Stoics believed that speech was never neutral. Every word either builds or breaks, uplifts or diminishes, reveals or conceals. To them, wisdom wasn't just found in books or battles, it was found in restraint, in choosing silence over noise, clarity over performance, truth over approval. Today, we live in a world that rewards speed and cleverness, but intelligence, real, grounded intelligence, often speaks the quietest. It doesn't shout to be heard. It listens before it speaks. And when it does speak, it leaves no bruises. This video isn't a checklist or a lecture. It's a quiet walk through 6 things a truly intelligent person rarely says, and more importantly, why. Not to impress others, but to stay in harmony with themselves. If you've ever wished your words could carry more weight or cause less regret, then stay with me. What follows might not change your voice, but it might just change the silence before it. Number 1. Avoid boasting about knowledge. Have you ever found yourself in a room where someone just couldn't stop talking about how much they knew? At first, it might feel impressive, someone confident, educated, articulate, but slowly, something begins to shift. You stop feeling inspired and start feeling smaller, not because their knowledge is meaningless, but because it's been weaponized, not to enlighten, but to elevate themselves. We all want to be seen as competent, as capable. But the Stoics remind us, the deeper the wisdom, the quieter it becomes. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Nature does not boast about what it creates, and neither should we. The tree does not praise its own shade. The sun does not demand applause for rising each day. Why then should we feel the need to advertise every insight we've collected? I once knew a man named John, brilliant by every definition. In the world of tech, he had built things most people couldn't even understand. Whenever we were at social gatherings or meetings, John had a way of turning every conversation into a stage. He'd mention the awards he'd won, the companies he'd consulted for, the breakthroughs he'd achieved. No one could deny his accomplishments, but slowly, people stopped asking for his thoughts. Not because they didn't respect him, but because his words didn't feel like a gift. They felt like a performance. Then something happened. One evening after a team presentation, a colleague pulled him aside, not to argue, not to criticize, but to say something simple. "You don't need to convince us anymore. We already know you're brilliant. But when you talk like that, it feels like you've already decided we have nothing to offer back." That moment changed something in John. It wasn't instant, but over time his presence shifted. He began asking more questions. He started listening longer before speaking, and when he did speak, his words landed differently. He stopped trying to sound impressive and started trying to be useful, and slowly, people began to seek him out again, not for his resume, but for his humility, his clarity, and the space he gave others to think, to speak, to grow. There's a powerful Stoic lesson here. Knowledge is not a performance, it's a responsibility. When you truly understand something, you don't feel the need to parade it. You express it in how you solve problems, how you hold space for others, how you speak less and contribute more. The Stoics believed that arrogance is a form of insecurity dressed up as confidence. Seneca wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, who is poor." In the same way, it's not the man who knows little who boasts. It's the one still unsure of whether what he knows has value unless someone claps. So the next time you're tempted to list your accomplishments, pause and ask, am I sharing to connect or to be seen. If your goal is to help, your words will naturally carry weight. But if your aim is to be admired, your wisdom becomes noise. This doesn't mean you silence your gifts. It means you offer them like water, not like fireworks. Fireworks impress for a moment. Water sustains for a lifetime. When you let your knowledge serve rather than shine, you become someone people not only respect, but trust. And here's the irony. When you no longer seek to impress, you become unforgettable. So let your silence carry more than your speech. Let your actions speak before your titles. Let your presence do what your voice cannot. Because the one who doesn't need to be seen is the one others look for. Let's move forward. Because silence is only one form of intelligence. The next is knowing when to stay out of certain conversations altogether. Number 2, never dismiss others' opinions. Have you ever spoken up only to watch your words fall into silence, ignored before they had a chance to live? There's a quiet kind of sting in being dismissed, not shouted down, just waved away, as if your thoughts weren't worth the air it took to express them. It's the kind of moment that doesn't leave a bruise, but it leaves a scar. And what's worse, after enough of these, you stop offering your thoughts altogether. You convince yourself you don't have much to say. The truth is, many of us have not only felt this, we've caused it. I know I have. Early on in my leadership journey, I prided myself on decisiveness. I thought being quick to judge was a strength. In one meeting, a colleague tentatively shared an idea about streamlining our workflow. Before he could finish, I cut in. No, that won't work. My tone was firm, final. I thought I was saving us time. But the room changed, subtly. A strange silence. Less engagement. Fewer ideas. People nodded, but no one leaned in. After the meeting, a colleague pulled me aside, someone I trusted. She said quietly, "That idea, it might have worked. Maybe next time, give it a second longer." It was a small comment, but it landed like thunder. In trying to lead, I'd become a gatekeeper. Not of wisdom, but of ego. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You cannot learn what you think you already know." That line stayed with me. Because what is dismissal if not the belief that there's nothing left for you to hear? Stoicism teaches that arrogance closes the door to growth. And when we reject someone's voice, especially before it's been fully heard, we're not just turning away an idea, we're turning away a person. So I made a shift, small at first. In the next few meetings, I said less. I listened longer. I let even the messiest ideas breathe before judging them. And something remarkable happened. People spoke more and better. Even those who used to stay quiet began contributing. Ideas I never would have thought of started to emerge, not polished, but full of potential. There was one moment I'll never forget. A junior team member, usually reserved, proposed a risky change to our customer feedback process. It wasn't perfect, but instead of dismissing it, I asked a question. What do you see that the rest of us might be missing? That one question opened a floodgate, and by the end of that quarter, her initiative had saved us hundreds of hours in repetitive reporting. Not because I had the best idea, but because I made space for someone else's. Listening doesn't mean agreement. It means respect. It means curiosity. And sometimes, even a bad idea can hold a good question or a perspective you hadn't considered. When we ask, "What can I learn from this?" instead of, "How can I disprove this?" we not only elevate the conversation, we elevate ourselves. Stoicism reminds us that we are not the center of the universe. Epictetus taught that our opinions are only one fragment of the whole. Dismissing others is, at its root, a refusal to accept that truth might live outside of us. And in doing so, we don't just cut off new knowledge, we cut off connection. Over time, this change in me changed the team. There was more energy, more creativity, and more trust. The atmosphere evolved from guarded efficiency to open collaboration. People stopped waiting for permission to speak. They started offering. And I realized something humbling. For years, I'd been surrounded by wisdom I never noticed because I was too busy speaking over it. So here's a new definition of strength: not being the loudest or the most certain, but being the most open. True wisdom doesn't need to win. It doesn't fear disagreement. It knows that every person carries a piece of the truth we haven't yet seen. And sometimes the greatest insight doesn't come from proving you're right. It comes from being willing to be surprised. If you want to lead, if you want to grow, if you want to connect, start by listening longer than you think you need to. Ask one more question than feels comfortable. Let silence do its work. And remember, the ideas that seem strange at first might be the very ones that change everything. Because in the end, the measure of our intelligence isn't just how we think, it's how well we listen. Now let's move on, because understanding others is one part of wisdom. The next is knowing the quiet power of refusing to speak at all. Number 3, refrain from complaining without purpose. Have you ever caught yourself mid-sentence, airing a frustration for the 5th time that day, and realized nothing ever changes afterward? The coffee still tastes bland, the traffic still crawls, the people still disappoint. And yet we keep narrating our dissatisfaction like it has some healing power. But all it does is echo and drain. The Stoics understood this trap well. Complaining to them was not just a waste of breath, it was a slow erosion of the soul. Marcus Aurelius reminded us, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength, and therein lies the key. Complaining about what we cannot change doesn't liberate us, it enslaves us. It binds our energy to things beyond our reach, while neglecting the one thing that's always within our grasp, our response. Let me tell you about Peter, mid-40s, seasoned in his career, known for his sharp mind and sharper critiques. At first, people welcomed his honesty. After all, it takes courage to name what's broken, but over time, the tone shifted. Peter complained about everything: the faulty coffee machine, the underperforming intern, the noisy neighbors. It wasn't just what he said, it was how often and how little it helped. People began to pull away, not out of malice, but fatigue. Conversations with Peter became less about ideas and more about grievances. Until one day, during a quiet lunch break, a colleague looked at him and asked, "Peter, but what are you doing about it?" That question was a turning point, not because it accused, but because it revealed. Peter wasn't looking for change, he was looking for release. But in doing so, he had built a cycle that drained both himself and everyone around him. This is the danger of aimless complaining. It creates the illusion of action while delivering none. It feeds a story where we are powerless, victims of circumstance, narrators of misfortune. But the Stoic path is the opposite. It asks, what can I do? Not to change the world, but to change my relationship to it. Complaints, when rooted in purpose, can be powerful. They can signal injustice, spotlight a problem, stir transformation. But when they're habitual, unfocused, and aimed only at venting, they lose their sharpness. They become noise. And in time, they shape not just our conversations, but our character. So how do we shift this? How do we break the loop? Start with a pause. The next time frustration rises, ask yourself, is this within my control? If yes, act. If no, release. because venting about rain won't stop the clouds, but preparing for the storm or dancing in it might just give the moment meaning. Then change the question. Instead of "Why does this always happen to me?" try "What is this teaching me?" The Stoics believed every difficulty carries a hidden lesson, not a cosmic punishment, but a test of discipline, of clarity, of courage. Complaining blinds us to these lessons. Reflection reveals them. Back to Peter. After that conversation, something in him shifted. He didn't become perfectly stoic overnight, but he started redirecting his energy. He stopped complaining about his boss and began crafting better proposals. He stopped grumbling about his commute and started listening to philosophy podcasts in traffic. He began journaling, not to rant, but to reflect. Over months, the tone of his voice changed. It carried less weight of resentment and more weight of thought. People noticed, and instead of avoiding him, they began seeking him out for advice, for calm, for perspective. Because when someone stops complaining and starts reflecting, their presence feels lighter, stronger, like someone who's walked through fire but carries no smoke. The lesson here isn't to suppress your frustrations, it's to refine them, to understand that words shape not just how others see us, but how we see the world. When we complain without aim, we rehearse our suffering, but when we choose action or even stillness, we reclaim our strength. Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. And few things waste more time, more spirit, more connection, than filling the space between us with grievances that go nowhere." So ask yourself, what do your words build? Do they leave people uplifted or worn down? Do they open space for growth or close the door with helplessness? Because ultimately, the choice is always ours. Every time we speak, we either drain the room or light a candle within it. If that resonates with you, type "less noise" in the comments to let me know you're still with me. And if you're finding quiet strength in these insights, consider subscribing. Sometimes the calmest voices leave the deepest marks. Let's move on. Because mastering what not to say is powerful, but knowing when not to speak at all, that's an even rarer strength. Number 4, no empty promises. Have you ever looked into someone's eyes after breaking a promise and seen the light in them dim, just slightly, but undeniably? It wasn't rage, it wasn't even disappointment. It was something quieter, a subtle withdrawal, a trust stepping one foot back. That's the silent damage of empty promises, not dramatic, not loud, but steady. And in time, it erodes even the strongest foundations. We rarely set out to deceive. Most broken promises come from good intentions. We say yes because we want to help, to show up, to make others happy. But the Stoics challenge us to examine something deeper. Intention without capacity is not virtue, it's vanity dressed as kindness. Marcus Aurelius reminded us, "Let your words be plain and true, not grand, not sugar-coated, true." A promise in Stoic terms isn't a polite gesture. It's a vow, a bridge between your word and your character. Greg learned this the hard way. He was a man you'd easily admire. In his early 50s, successful in his field, respected by peers, devoted to family, he was the kind of person who prided himself on being dependable. So he said yes to nearly everything, reviewing reports for his team by Monday, attending a family dinner on Thursday, helping a neighbor over the weekend, a dozen promises a week, all genuine, none malicious. But slowly, something shifted. Deadlines slipped, dinners were missed, apologies became common, and the trust he'd built so carefully began to wear thin. His team started hedging. Let's see if Greg actually gets to it. His family lowered their expectations. They stopped asking. Then, one night, Greg came home to find a note on his desk. It was from his teenage daughter. No anger, no blame. Just a simple sentence written in her careful, honest handwriting. "We just want you to mean it when you say it." That note broke something open, because Greg wasn't lying. He truly believed every yes he gave. But belief isn't enough. Intention without action is a broken contract, and that realization changed everything. Stoic philosophy teaches that integrity isn't about saying the right things, it's about saying what you mean and doing what you say. A promise, no matter how small, creates expectation. And when those expectations are repeatedly unmet, the effect is cumulative. Each missed follow-through chips away at your credibility, not just in others' eyes, but in your own. You begin to doubt your own word, and when your word loses weight, so does your identity. So how do we protect our promises? Not by saying less, but by meaning more. It starts with a pause. Before you commit to anything, whether it's a task, a meeting, a personal favor, ask yourself, do I truly have the time, the energy, the clarity to do this well? If the answer is vague or hesitant, don't push past it. Honor that hesitation. Because a thoughtful "let me check and get back to you" is far more powerful than a reflexive "sure" that never comes to life. The Stoics believed in clarity over comfort. A clear no, delivered with respect, is an act of truth. It may feel hard in the moment, but it protects what matters most: trust. And trust, once fractured, is a slow thing to rebuild. Another principle worth embracing: under-promise and over-deliver. Set timelines that you can confidently meet. Offer support you know you can provide. Then, when possible, exceed those expectations. That's how reputations are built, through reliability, not reach. Imagine Greg saying, "I'll need 3 days to review this," and finishing it in 2. Imagine him telling his daughter, "I won't make it to dinner this Thursday, but let's plan Friday, and I'll be there the whole evening." In both cases, the message isn't "I can do everything." It's "I will do what I say." But what happens when we do fall short? Because we will. We're human. Life will get in the way. We'll forget. We'll miscalculate. We'll promise and not deliver. In those moments, Stoic strength lies not in denial, but in accountability. Address it directly. Own it. Apologize sincerely. Offer a new timeline or solution. That simple act of responsibility can repair more than the original mistake ever damaged. Greg began practicing this. He started saying no, not out of coldness, but clarity. He told his team what he could do and when. He spoke with fewer assurances, but more intention. And his family noticed. They felt his presence return, not in how often he was there, but in how fully he showed up when he was. His team regained their confidence in him, not because he said yes more, but because his yes meant something again. Over time, Greg felt a shift within himself. A piece he hadn't realized was missing. The anxiety of overcommitting fell away. In its place, focus, stillness, and a quiet pride in knowing that his words were no longer just promises, they were principles. This is the Stoic way, to say only what you intend to follow, to build your life not on impressive speech, but on disciplined action, to understand that every promise you make, even the casual ones, are bricks in the structure of your character. So the next time you're asked for your time, your help, your word, pause. Ask yourself if your yes is built on certainty or pressure. And remember, you don't need to promise much. You just need to deliver what you do, because in the end, we're not remembered for what we agreed to. We're remembered for what we honored, not for the weight of our words, but for the truth that carried them. Now let's continue, because beyond promises and speech lies an even rarer strength: the courage to be silent. Number 5. Don't deny your mistakes. Have you ever felt your chest tighten the moment you realized you messed up? That subtle panic, that whisper of fear. What will they think of me? It's human. We instinctively try to protect ourselves, to avoid blame, to preserve whatever image we think others hold of us. But there's a deeper truth that the Stoics understood long before us. Refusing to admit your mistake doesn't preserve your strength. It hides it. And over time, what you hide begins to rot. I used to believe that admitting fault would make me look weak, that showing my hand would cost me respect, until one experience unraveled that illusion. A few years ago, I was leading a high-stakes project at work. The timeline was brutal, the pressure unrelenting. In my drive to get it done, I rushed through a critical report, missing several details that, once exposed, led to real consequences. Our team faced criticism from upper management. Morale dropped, and in that moment, everything inside me wanted to deflect, blame the timeline, the stress, the miscommunication, anything but myself. But I paused. I remembered a line from Marcus Aurelius: "If someone is able to prove me wrong and show me my mistake in any thought or action, I will gladly change, for it is the truth I seek, and the truth never harmed anyone." That quote hit differently that day, because it wasn't about guilt, it was about alignment. If I claimed to value truth, then I had to live it, even when it pointed back at me. At the next team meeting, I stood up and owned it. I explained where I had failed, apologized sincerely, and outlined how we'd fix it and how I'd make sure it wouldn't happen again. I braced for silence. But instead, I got something unexpected. Nods, support, even gratitude. One colleague said, "Thanks for saying it out loud. That takes guts." In that moment, I realized admitting my mistake didn't weaken me. It made me real. And in being real, I became relatable, trustworthy, and strangely stronger. Why does taking responsibility carry such power? Because it dissolves the illusion that any of us are above error. It creates safety, first for ourselves and then for others. When you admit a mistake, you stop defending your ego and start defending the truth. You signal that you're more committed to growth than to being right. And that kind of clarity is rare. It creates a culture where others no longer fear blame, but instead are invited into accountability. But let's not sugarcoat it. Admitting you're wrong still stings. There's a vulnerability to it, a quiet fear of judgment. Yet, if you look deeper, you'll see that denying the obvious does more harm than the mistake ever did. People aren't foolish. They notice when you're dancing around the truth. And the more you deflect, the less you're trusted. So how do we step into this kind of strength? Start with self-awareness. When something goes wrong, resist the urge to point outward. Ask instead, what was my part in this? Even if it's just 10%, own that 10% fully. Integrity isn't about having all the answers. It's about having the humility to ask the right questions. Then move to action. An apology is just the start. What matters is what comes next. What will you change? What will you do differently? That's where your credibility is rebuilt, not in your words, but in your willingness to rise after the fall. There's something deeply Stoic about this. Seneca wrote, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials." Mistakes are friction. They scrape our pride. But if we let them, they refine us. Those who deny their errors stay stuck. But those who embrace them, who study them, who grow from them, become unshakable. And the impact isn't just personal. When you own your failures, you give others permission to do the same. You create a ripple of courage. You lead not just with skill, but with example. Greg, the man in the story, came to learn this. Over time, his honesty softened the defensiveness in others. His willingness to be corrected brought a humility to the team. And slowly, he stopped being seen as just a manager and began to be respected as a leader. So the next time you're faced with the temptation to deny a mistake, pause, look it in the eye, and remember, it's not weakness to be wrong, it's weakness to stay there, unacknowledged. True intelligence is not about being flawless. It's about being brave enough to face yourself and disciplined enough to become better for it. Let's move forward, because the strongest minds aren't always the ones who speak first. Sometimes they're the ones who choose silence with intention. Number 6, don't overshare future plans. Have you ever said yes to something just to avoid disappointing someone, even when you knew deep down you probably wouldn't follow through? Maybe it was agreeing to meet for dinner you didn't have time for, volunteering for a project you already felt overwhelmed by, or promising to show up to an event just to be polite. In the moment, it feels harmless, even generous. But later, when the day comes and you cancel or forget entirely, what felt kind now feels hollow. And sometimes that kind of well-meaning promise can do more harm than a clear, respectful no ever could. The Stoics warned us of this very trap. They believed that our words, especially our commitments, are not just sounds. They are signals of our character. Marcus Aurelius said, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." It's a simple but profound reminder. Don't speak what you cannot stand behind. In a world that encourages us to overextend and overpromise, the Stoic path calls us back to restraint, to truth, to integrity. Let me tell you about Jim. Jim was in his mid-50s, soft-spoken, likable, the kind of guy everyone wanted on their team, at their party, in their corner. He had a warmth that made people feel safe. He hated letting anyone down, so he rarely said no. Whether it was a friend asking for help moving, a co-worker requesting last-minute support, or a family member inviting him to a gathering, Jim had one reply: "Sure, count me in," and for a while people appreciated it. But then things started to slip. He forgot commitments, cancelled last minute, double-booked himself. His well-intentioned yes became unreliable. One day, a close friend invited him to an important family dinner. Jim, as usual, agreed with enthusiasm. But the same night, he scheduled a work meeting and forgot about the dinner entirely. The next day, his friend didn't yell. They simply said, "We just want you to mean it when you say it." That quiet truth struck him deeply, because it wasn't about the dinner, it was about trust. Jim realized that though he meant well, his constant eagerness to please had created a pattern of disappointment. His words were slowly losing weight, not because of one big failure, but because of 1,000 little ones. This is the hidden cost of oversharing future intentions. We want to be agreeable, we want to be helpful, but in saying yes to everything, we dilute the value of every yes we give. The Stoics saw this not just as a social mistake, but as a failure in internal discipline. To them, restraint was a form of respect, not just for others, but for yourself. So how do we break this habit? It starts with a pause. When someone asks something of you, don't answer immediately out of politeness or pressure. Take a moment. Ask yourself, does this align with my priorities? Can I truly follow through? If the answer is uncertain, then a kind but clear "not this time" may be far more respectful than a promise you can't keep. People respect honesty more than availability. You don't need to be everywhere to be respected. You just need to be consistent where you choose to show up. One thoughtful yes followed through with presence and excellence is worth more than a dozen vague affirmations that end in apology. Another Stoic principle to consider: under-promise and over-deliver. It's better to say you need a week and deliver in 3 days than promise tomorrow and arrive late. Let your actions surprise people with their reliability. That's how trust is built, through quiet, consistent execution, not grand projections. Jim began practicing this. Slowly, he started saying no when necessary, not harshly, just honestly. He adjusted his language too. Instead of, "I'll definitely be there," he'd say, "I'd love to come, let me confirm once I know for sure." Or, "I'll try my best to help, but I'll let you know if anything changes." It wasn't less warm, it was more real, and that shift changed everything. People stopped assuming he was unreliable. They started believing him again, because when he did say yes, it meant something. It wasn't about volume anymore. It was about weight, about sincerity. He also realized something deeper. Every promise you make is a thread in your identity. And when you break those threads, your character begins to unravel, not just in the eyes of others, but in your own. You start doubting your word. You start feeling fractured. And that inner dissonance is exhausting. Seneca once wrote, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." And here's the thing, saying no feels like adversity. It feels like you're letting someone down. But in truth, it's an act of clarity. It's how you protect your focus, how you preserve the strength to say yes where it truly counts. We live in a time where being busy is seen as a badge of honor. But the Stoics didn't chase chaos, they cultivated order. They understood that scattering yourself too thin doesn't make you generous, it makes you ineffective. Saying yes to everything is not kindness, it's chaos in disguise. So the next time you're tempted to make a promise, pause. Don't speak from pressure, speak from presence. If your word is going to matter, let it be rooted in truth, not habit. Choose fewer commitments, but honor them deeply. Let people feel your yes, not just in the moment you say it, but in the moment you show up and follow through. Because in the end, it's not the number of promises that define you, it's the ones you keep. That's where your strength lives. That's where your character shines. Now that we've walked through these 6 principles, take a moment and ask yourself, which of these do you need to live more deeply today? Let your reflection turn into action, because the most intelligent voice is not always the loudest. It's the one that speaks with intention and lives with alignment. He began living with intention, saying no when he needed to, honoring what he said he would do, and slowly the people around him stopped waiting for promises. They started trusting his presence, because in the end, true intelligence is not about clever words. It's about alignment between what you say and how you live. The Stoics remind us that every word shapes not just how the world sees us, but how we see ourselves. So next time you're asked for a commitment, pause. Choose truth over pressure. If this spoke to you, comment, "Speak wisely" below. And if you're ready for more, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. You're growing. Stay with it.